Hi. Everything's so efficiently scheduled and on time. My name is Dawn Lundy Martin, and I am co-director with Terrence Hayes of the Center for African American Poetry and Poetics. We call it CAAPP for short here at the University of Pittsburgh. Welcome to you all. Thank you for coming. Welcome to this unique celebration of sculptor Thaddeus Mosley and his work. Tonight, Mr. Mosley will receive the Dietrich School of Arts and Sciences Distinguished Professional Achievement Award. I think it's well earned. I'm sure that you do too. We welcome Thaddeus Mosley back to his alma mater. Welcome, Thad. We also welcome 4 highly acclaimed poets tonight: Francine J. Harris, Ronaldo V. Wilson, R. Erica Doyle, and Douglas Kearney. These poets have been in Pittsburgh since Friday as residents in our Dream Space residency program. They're the first group to come through in this capacity. This is a program where poets are invited to engage with Pittsburgh, its landscapes, its histories, and its artists and writers, and to produce new work or begin new work. And in this instance, the poets were invited to engage the work of Mr. Mosley, who on Saturday generously spent several hours with the poets in his studio and at his home. He fed them lunch. I thought it was going to be like, maybe like an hour-long studio visit. And it was literally, I was getting texts like 6 hours later that they were still engaging. So what we will experience tonight will be truly cross-genre, inter-genre work produced in and alongside Thaddeus Mosley's inventive aesthetic productions and his process. One of the things we do at CAAPP is to teach a course called Studio in African American Poetry and Poetics. Well, we're doing it for the first time this fall. And as a part of the Dream Space residency program, Francine and Ronaldo and Erica and Doug engaged students for 3 hours on Monday night during the class. And during that engagement, Doug Kearney talked about visiting Mr. Mosley's studio, noting that he plays jazz constantly when he works and sculpts. I can't remember Doug's exact words because my notes were elliptical, so here's my elliptical rendering. This is what Doug says. I hear a piece of music and it makes me want to write poetry. When we work in ways that approach ekphrasis, which is an engagement, poetry engagement with the visual arts, we try to get to the secret of that other work of art: the music, the sculpture, the dance, the painting. That's the end of my elliptical note-taking, but I love that idea so much. I love this idea that what we do when we engage another art form is we try to get to the secret of it. And I love, too, not only what the process of engaging another art form can do for the poet or the artist, but also what it does for audiences who experience something they've not experienced before. The future might depend on this space of imagining, this reforming. How one thing rubbing against another thing changes both things, but we're not sure until the friction has already occurred, when new things or new ideas can't be incorporated into an already discourse. This might be where we enter the future. And I'm talking about the future because our theme for the year is Black Futures. Tonight we experience some of that new future. So again, it's my pleasure to host these poets, and some of them are also poets and artists and performers at the same time, and for CAAPP to be a part of Dean Kathleen Blee's presentation of the Distinguished Alumni Award to Thaddeus Mosley. Thank you, too, to the Charles Crow Fund for your support of this event. You all have the program, so you know the order of things. I am happy to introduce Dean Blee to start things off. Dean Kathleen Blee received her BA in sociology from Indiana University in 1974. She carried out her graduate studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, earning the MS and PhD in sociology in 1976 and 1982, respectively. Blee began her faculty career in 1981 at the University of Kentucky, where she eventually held the rank of professor. She joined the University of Pittsburgh Department of Sociology at the rank of professor in 1996, and her recruitment to Pitt included an appointment as the director of the Women's Studies program. I guess what was then the Women's Studies program. She was appointed Distinguished Professor of Sociology in 2007. A highly productive scholar who communicates her research through both scholarly articles and books, Blee has published, to my mind this is astonishing, 76 journal articles, encyclopedia entries, and book chapters. Yes, that deserves applause already. I haven't even gotten to the books. She has published 3 edited or co-edited books and has 4 scholarly monographs, 1 co-authored, published or in press. Her first monograph, I'm going to skip like the middle books, but her first monograph was Women in the Klan, Racism and Gender in the 1920s. It's published by the University of California Press in 1991. I read this and I was just completely blown away by it, and that was my introduction to her work, which is amazing. Her latest book is Understanding Racist Activism, Theory, Methods, and Research, and that's going to be published this year. She has a ton of awards from the University of Pittsburgh, major teaching and scholarship awards, a Chancellor's Distinguished Research Award, Chancellor's Distinguished Teaching Award, Provost Award in Excellence in Mentoring. She served as the Dietrich School's Associate Dean for Graduate Studies and Research from 2012 to 2017. And now, she began her deanship of the Dietrich School in 2017, in August, just recently. So the deanship of the Dietrich School and the College of General Studies. Please join me in welcoming Kathleen Blee.
Thank you, Dawn, for that really nice introduction, and good evening. It's always a pleasure to be at CAAPP events, and I'm particularly delighted to be here tonight to celebrate our Dietrich School alumnus, Thaddeus Mosley, and to present him with the University of Pittsburgh's Distinguished Professional Achievement Award. This is an award which honors outstanding Pitt graduates, both for their exemplary careers and for their records of public service. In an artistic career spanning more than 5 decades, Thaddeus Mosley has been recognized with the Governor's Award for Artist of the Year in Pennsylvania Visual Arts and the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts Cultural Award. He's had solo exhibitions at the Carnegie Museum of Art and the Q Art Foundation Gallery in New York City, and his work can be found in prominent locations throughout the city of Pittsburgh, including within the August Wilson Center for African American Culture, the David L. Lawrence Convention Center, and the Manchester Craftsmen's Guild. Mr. Mosley grew up in Newcastle, Pennsylvania, the son of a coal miner, who was also a self-taught naturalist. As a child, Thaddeus would walk through the woods with his father, amazed at how much his father knew about various animals and various plants and flowers, solely from reading and observing. When Thaddeus was in middle school, he decided he wanted to attend college, and from that point on, he prioritized his studies, graduating from high school with honors. As an undergraduate at the University of Pittsburgh, lucky us that he chose to come here, Mr. Mosley studied English and journalism. He didn't pursue art or intend to be a sculptor at that time, but he recalls being drawn to African art. In a 1997 interview, he said, and I'm quoting, "I quickly grew from being interested in it to being exhilarated by the energy and inventiveness of those countless objects made unselfconsciously by anonymous people as part of their lives, end quote. Mr. Mosley fed his growing passion for art with frequent trips to the Carnegie Museum and long conversations with a good friend who was a painter. And as a result, he became intrigued with all types of modern art. Following his father's example from years before, Mr. Mosley learned by teaching himself. He read, visited the museum, and worked to develop his craft. Yet he wasn't planning to be a professional sculptor. He was, as he told an interviewer, merely hoping to have sculpture in his own house and maybe enter a few shows. In the meantime, Mr. Mosley put his English degree to good use, freelancing for publications including Ebony and the Pittsburgh Courier newspaper, and tried his hand at photography. But primarily, he worked for the U.S. Postal Service. It wasn't until in his 30s that Mr. Mosley began making art, and since the mid-1960s, he's exhibited frequently. He had his first solo show at the Carnegie Museum of Art in 1968, and he's been recently invited back for next fall's 2018 Carnegie International. What a wonderful way to celebrate a 50th anniversary. I first came to know Mr. Mosley's work through his stunning winged house on the north side, one of the writers' residences that's part of Pittsburgh City of Asylum, which provides sanctuary to endangered literary writers, enabling them to continue writing and preventing their voices from being silenced. The design of the house is inspired by a passage from The Man Died, a prison memoir by Nigerian author Wole Soyinka, a co-founder of Cities of Asylum and winner of the Nobel Prize in Literature. Mr. Mosley was commissioned to create a sculpture for the facade of the house. In an interview about his work on that piece, he said, and I quote, "I want to do something with an idea that with cultural activity or creative activity, there's a moment when as things become clear that you start to fly with the idea or take wing. So I wanted the whole house to look like it might be lifted up." If you haven't seen this piece, you should go tomorrow to see this piece. Whether he's creating a symbol of the local black community rising from the ashes of the 1968 Pittsburgh riots, as he did with the Phoenix, or acknowledging the strides Pittsburgh's African American community has made to get to the top of the proverbial mountain, referenced in Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, as he did with the piece The Mountaintop, Thaddeus Mosley's work lifts all of us up. We are here tonight to celebrate and to honor Mr. Mosley's incredible professional and personal successes. And I'd like to conclude by again sharing his thoughts on the matter, and to quote, "To me, success means having pride in yourself. It doesn't mean you have a lot of money, a big house, and 2 or 3 cars. Being contented with who you are and what you're able to do and living a good life, that to me is my success," end quote. Mr. Mosley, it's my honor to present to you the University of Pittsburgh's Distinguished Professional Achievement Award.
Well, thank you. Turn this is. Thank you all for coming out. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Many, many years ago, I came to Pitt in 1946, ran track a little bit, and wrote for the Pitt News, but never did I think that I would be receiving an honor from the University of Pittsburgh. But what I'm most happy about was meeting these poets and seeing that the University of Pittsburgh has a vibrant Afro-American program. When I went to Pitt, there was no such thing. They did not have an Afro-American instructor even when I was here. So things do change. And in the times when many schools are abandoning the culture, arts, literature, to see a university that is promoting these sort of ideas and realizing and helping others realize what the arts mean in life. And rather than, I've asked this question many times when I was doing a residency at a university, and a young man asked me, "Can you make any money doing sculpture?" I said, "Depends on who you are and what you're making it for." I said, "There are people making a lot of money, and then there are people like me aren't making any." I said, "But I think my life is richer than a lot of people who are just selling stuff, because you saw a picture of my little house. I'm surrounded by the things I love. It's very rich, and even if it's a dark, rainy, snowy night, I'm still happy because I have things around me that I love." And again, I want to thank the university. I want to thank the poets, Ronaldo, Erica, Douglas, and Lauren, and there's another young lady, Francine. It was a beautiful day, and them spending time in the studio looking at those strange things. But that's what life is about. And so I purchased a book of each of your work, so I'll be able to give you a real staunch critique in about a year. So thank you so much.
Oh, okay. So we have a fabulous, I don't know what's going to happen because all of this work was made this week, but I am going to just read the bios of the poets in the order that they will present their work. And so then they will come up. So the first poet to present her work is Francine J. Harris. She's the author of Play Dead, which is winner of the 2017 Lambda Literary and Audre Lorde Awards. Her first collection, Allegiance, was a finalist for the 2013 Kate Tufts Discovery and the Penn Open Book Award. Originally from Detroit, she has received fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts as a Cave Canem poet and is currently a writer in residence at Washington University in St. Louis. Our second poet this evening is Ronaldo V. Wilson. He is the author of Narrative of the Life of the Brown Boy and the White Man, University of Pittsburgh Press, 2008. I'm only going to mention one press. I mentioned University of Pittsburgh Press. Winner of the 2007 Cave Canem Prize, Poems of the Black Object, which is winner of the Tom Gunn Award for Gay Poetry and the Asian American Literary Award in Poetry in 2010. His latest books are Father Traveler, Poetry, Prose, Other, 2015, which is a finalist for the Tom Gunn Award. And he has another book, Lucy, 72, which is forthcoming from 1913 Press. He is co-founder of the Black Took Collective, and I'm also co-founder of the Black Tick Collective with Doryale E. Harris, where the three of us are its founders and its only people. He is also a mixed media artist, dancer, and performer, and we actually have 3 of Ronaldo's works in the CAAPP office of his visual art. He's a recipient of fellowships from Cave Canem, the Jurasi Artist Program, the Ford Foundation, Kundiman, McDowell, the National Research Council, Provincetown Fine Arts Work Center, the Center for Art and Thought, and Yaddo. He's currently an associate professor of creative writing and literature at the University of California, Santa Cruz. He's on the core faculty of Creative Critical PhD program, which is brand new, and co-directing the creative writing program. Our third writer this evening is R. Erica Doyle. She was born in Brooklyn to Trinidadian immigrant parents. Her debut collection, Proxy, won the 2014 Norma Farber First Book Award from the Poetry Society of America and was a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award in Lesbian Poetry. Her work has been anthologized in Best American Poetry, Our Caribbean, A Gathering of Gay and Lesbian Writing from the Antilles, a Deaf Poetry Jam, and Gathering Ground, a reader celebrating Cave Canem's first decade, among others. She has received grants and awards from the Hurston Wright Foundation, the Estrella Lesbian Writers Fund, the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities, the Humanities Council of DC, and Poets and Writers, and she was a New York Foundation for the Arts Poetry Fellow. She's also a Cave Canem Fellow, which is a workshop and retreat for Black poets. And then our final poet performer this evening is Douglas Kearney, who has published 6 books of poetry, or 6 books, not all of poetry. Most recently, Buck Studies, 2016, winner of the CLMP Firecracker Award for Poetry and silver medalist for the California Book Award, Poetry. His third collection, Patter, 2014, was a finalist for the California Book Award in Poetry. Cultural critic Greg Tate remarked that Kearney's second book, which was a national poetry series selection titled The Black Automaton, quote, flows from a consideration of urban speech, Negro spontaneity, and book learning, unquote. Kearney's works have appeared in anthologies including Of Poetry and Protest, from Emmett Till to Trayvon Martin, 2016, Best American Poetry, 2014 and 2015, Best American Experimental Writing, 2014. It's rare that people get both of those things, Best American Poetry and Best Experimental Writing, just a note. And the Breakbeat Poets, New American Poetry in the Age of Hip Hop, and many others. He has received a Whiting Award, a Whiting Writers Award, residencies, fellowships from Cave Canem, the Rauschenberg Foundation, and others, and he teaches at Cal Arts. Please welcome all of our poets this evening. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I have a couple photos I wanted to show folks in a second. But I wanted to take a moment to thank Don Lundy Martin in the Center for African American Poetry and Poetics for inviting me to be part of this incredible celebration for the work of Thaddeus Mosley. This week has been amazing, and I'm so excited to be joining the brilliant people on this stage. And I'm immensely grateful for Thaddeus for welcoming us into your studio and your home. This will stay with me for a long time. I have 3 poems. The first one, I actually have to thank Doug for suggesting I needed a poem that ended this way. So this is Quilting Time after Romare Bearden. Tonight, an artist tells me she met the love of her life on a tour in his studio. She says it while feeding her baby girl, who has taken the habit of touching her index fingers together to say more, so her mother would pull her in close and lift her shirt. It's an unusual sign, and I asked the young painter about it. Without words yet, she would touch both fingers to give them common body language. Now the baby has learned that. The artist asks me if I mind, which sort of hurts. Mind if she feeds her daughter. Mind if I am here while they nestle into one another. When really, I'm honored oddly to be near that moment. It's an odd collapse from art to the touch. The oil in our fingers will upset the archive. The clumsy selfie taker shatters Kusama's work. $1 million dots suddenly everywhere. Once, at the Brooklyn Art Museum, a teenager stood in Sanford Bigger's Blossom, sand to take a shot, then meandered to the canvas of Alanatsui's liquor bottle caps, reached both hands over the tape, took a huge fist grip of it and squeezed. I reached out to say, "You can't do that." And I don't remember now if I actually touched him or not. It's not like I haven't stood in front of Bearden's quilting time in Detroit and wanted so bad to be part of the mosaic, I could feel it in my teeth. In Mosley's studio that chilly afternoon, we moved around the space a long time, around the cool of the linseed and the press of the wood, over the rolling reliefs, around the rippled facades, in an inverted round with its hollows folding into each other. I found myself crawling as near to its concave as I could, suddenly back to a place when I was a fatty little girl, calling an oak tree at school my very best friend, sitting at the trunk of that memory in the bright green lawn of the warehouse, my baby don't care for me, blowing into the low basement air. I finally had the nerve to ask if there was any particular piece he wouldn't mind us touching. "Touch," said Thaddeus, waving his arms around the studio. "Touch whatever you want." What do I do? Yeah, that's the one. Except I don't know how to get to it. How do I make it bigger? Sorry. So this terrible picture, actually. I'm not the best photographer. This one. There's two sculptures that I thought it would be helpful just to show you. This is a sculpture in Thad's studio, and he said it was done with the chihuahua in mind, which is a ceremonial figure used in Bambara agricultural ceremony. Half antelope, half aardvark, represents the marriage of sky and the earth in the making of the year's crop. And I feel like that theme, well, I'll let the poem do all that, but I wrote this sonnet and was thinking about the turns not just at the volta, but also kind of from line to line, thinking about the ripples sculpture. The Chihuahua sculptor. The Chihuahua is shaped for its twin reach, its antler, a goddess becoming taproot. Consider the locust, the root system, 20 feet deep down, down toward the sky. So kissed, marrying seed. And so comes the carver to elevate down into the earth, the dream tundra below dirt, beneath our hunger, beneath rain soak, and scaling up into the clouds, sun suckling, making of dirt its gravity shadow. So lane all over spin the dizzying trunk, soberly stretch the sculptor's floor, studio, farmed to harvest of drying, each log a decade of skybound permanence. So antelope in its grace of pitched horizon, the black eye, wide lash makes son of a heft. This is what becomes his grounded body each time he drags trunk onto pallet and stands over its bark, twisting sap into stripped, lifting from the limb its radical shade. Down with the aardvark hero, the hero is rooting with both feet planted and mallet, which is also in the round, a black metal sun, the pound and drive and heat from above. Come see what he has sown, bright, what marvels out of pedestal's halo. The Chihuahua is both hands of sky and earth. Love is turning the sun in his hands, earth of the antler's shape. And then this other one. You can already see it. I really absolutely don't know how to pull this up. Oh, it is. I'm so sorry. So I almost didn't show you this because I've got my hands all over it, but I figured it went with the first poem. So he told me to touch stuff, and I couldn't stop touching it. So this is called Moods of Parker, and this is in his house. And it just got me thinking about moods of jazz, Parker's mood, Monk's mood. And, so I wrote this. The moods aren't explicit, but hopefully you can get it. Oh, one more. I want to show you my favorite mood. So I'll just leave that up. 12 Moods of Mosley. After Moods of Parker and Langston Hughes, Ask Your Mama, 12 Moods of Jazz. They teach you there's a boundary line to music, but man, there's no boundary line to art. Charlie Parker. 1. Salvation. The arborist treats what the arborist can and prunes and mends trees, phloem and cambium to heart out what ails it. The cast-off comes from the gurney and the artist saves the body. The artist takes the body of tree and moves it through the community he has loved for much of his life, over the Monongahela, over the Allegheny, through the Mexican war streets. The sculpture thus begins in movement. Mosley says, strength is the mood of how you lift. The log moves with you and becomes part of your body. Strength is also movement, the practice, the daily heft of trunk, the over and over passion, the artist and body lifted into his studio, hoisted onto pallet. The artist's first strength is to the outer bark. A mood of reverence, the husk, the cast-off bark, the rolls of thick forest skin around his studio, how he knows to strip them in full form, keeping the sound of the woodland in their circumference. A mood reverence, too, for the inner bark, the color of its bone, the rough touch of its pulp. It's historic, the mood, the moving log from land, over the river, along the river, the timber moved along the Niger, pulleyed up from the Bandiagara escarpment to Dogon village. Maybe Brancusi rescued small timber from the Retizat mountain to carve tools for his farm. Perhaps Noguchi, too, took little logs from the Uka River in Yokohama in childhood, refuge, and preparation. The mood is spiritual, the mask, the totem, the jazz, the figure, the gouge. In the mood of collection, he gathers photographs of legend, Joe Harris and Eckstein and Jerry Allen. He gathers photographers calling on the name of Teenie Harris like mantra when he talks about his walls. In the mood of collecting, the paintings join him, rough acrylic brushstrokes of Sam Gilliam, the dioramas of Church, his own children's charcoal washes facing shelves of catalog and books, Ed Roberson's poems on typed pages next to typed pages of August Wilson. Love provides a need to reconsider the lineage, the playwright once wrote. The chariot rounds our somersault with precision. In the mood of precision, the artist knows the balance of weight. It's a timber-sun dovetailed into thin totem. It's a sculpted walnut moon in the round, living on sycamore stalk. In the mood of precision, he knows the tool and its mark, knows the river of movement in each gesture. As Roberson says, it's like he's lifting it off. It's the myth of the improv move. The touch is so high relief, the ease of decision, hundreds of small incision and remove, thousands of signatures, the cut of the saw clearing for the fine hand groove. The mood is also communal, lineage behind him talking, the ancestry in each log, the lineage listening, the many students he has spent years teaching how to move what the forest gives. It's the student looking up at Mosley and drawing him looking up to the hall of his sculpture. It's communal, the mood, when Mosley says he listens to the wood and the wood will tell you what it needs. This too, the generous mood, how he walks us to nearly every sculpture, documenting circumstance, the naming generous when the sculptures move out into the world. This is how the jazz mood, it's really just the mood of freedom, the freedom to bas relief, the freedom to high like horns, the freedom to drums to chisel, the freedom of the cherrywood talking, the freedom of sycamore hum, the freedom of the tines of the locust waving arms wild, the freedom of the artist among us, standing the sculpture for the first time back up to the sky. Thank you.
On October 28, 2017, I made an opaque sandwich before I went underground in the studio. That was filled with trees.
Da 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 da. Thank you. Thank you, Thaddeus, for taking us into a place.
Capacity office now in a condition of lacking transparency or translucent opaqueness. Thinner paints need black added to increase opacity, obscurity of meaning, the difficulty and opacity in modest text charge in mid-16th century. From French opacity, from Latin opacitas, from Opticus darken, our good rule from which we yet expect such power to transform us, is hidden, cautionless, strident, its roots examined. Let us back to our forebearers, whose assumption it was that the black man, to be truly human and acceptable, must first become like us. This assumption, once accepted, the Negro in America can only acquiesce in the obliteration of one
I would like to present here more of a crush. Lucy loves Thaddeus, a long ago sight of desire, from one critical instant to the next. Or perhaps this is a way to come up for air in some minutes away from the studio, into one not ours, but still home, a home by way of the self, or into a home full with art, as one recalls a way in and renders it through what is found and what is forged into and bent, a way in which I am moving into, as I want to do whatever you want, Thaddeus said, and Lucy did not see it coming. But we decided to let the want in as the case shifts. If I ignore The fan pushing still, my brain won't stop. I know my race is not more than an idea. The way it peers around a figure that's made of porcelain, cracked, the dish broken by the tiring stairs to repeat again and again what's clearly said. It's like the great mouth of a whale sucking in the krill, plant, fish, or other told. My head is led by arteries that valve to my heart. The rubber tires spin, wheels grip the black asphalt. I take in the image of the body, carting it in, wheels flung off. My blues, a brown squirrel, stripe dipping in. Dear Thaddeus, in my hands there are shavings from the wood of some nameless sculpture, and I was a little jelly that Francine got a bouquet, but I wanted to find something out there too, and carried it around by corsage. A boutonniere becomes a wand, and I realize that if I twist my back when running, it will seize, but for now, I hold in my fingers reason to move forward steady, to not live a fast life, which was the angle inside, opacity. To be opaque is to not be able to see through or to see through the stained wood shavings in my hands that pierce me into the morning, to find a way without finding, to move into the nameless SCULPTOR. There's a tug in the fingers, as does the shape of the found industrial exhaust pipes bend. The gills, it seems, though I'm not thinking, it does help think of going underwater in the seething or feeling between pieces. And I wanted to move against gravity too, in wood. When one says embodied, does one mean blood, lanced, or boiled in order to be reenacted? For it's the side-eyed of meaning. I don't want to talk anymore, let alone read, which is a lot like being content with the vector versus the line. Though I am interested in the line, the long row of being with the sculptures that are called cousins. You call your words, and my fingers are as attentive as the shadows. Watch this. In moving on down the line, a row of not bones. Watch that. Why do I find myself looking at the relationship between the ulna and the radius? It feels so indirect. And can my body bend into the shape in which I will meet the next as in? There should be audio there. There should be a moment in which Thaddeus was talking about wood that was bleached. Listen, and there's some music too. Or, my sense tells me the blue will burn through the gray of this morning's matte Lucian light. This is where I stop reading. This is the moment of the impulsive object. This is the moment in which I do something like bowing parallel to a mood, a through line of thought. The sculptural is the gestural, is the theoretical break. Outside of a humility in a house, when Thaddeus said, art helps the art, wine helps the art, wine helps the art helps the wine, and I'm waiting. There's no sound. It's totally silent. There's library noises in there, I know. I made that audio high. I'll have to make a soundtrack for you. It's a natural day for a sleigh ride where the mast slides across the periphery. It's a natural time in the hour that makes divots inside of the wood. You know the water will drain like crazy, yes it will, yes it will. It's a natural day for a sleigh ride when the aperture is useless. It's a natural day with a poet when the sculptural takes into the gut. Just like I sat over the fish, I was wandering through the kaleidoscope of the mystery of the restraint. It's the same. You might recognize the fireplace in your cathedral of learning, which makes the perfect video backdrop for a sculptor's recollection or a retrospective in the form of a prize where the image gets refracted in brick. No, there was no fire, but for sure you were dire. Ronaldo V. Wilson was deconstructing, and you know what's happening here. As I asked Francine in the car, do you recognize that space? It's a fireplace as backdrop where the screen becomes collapse. It's not collage, it's collision. I've learned this at this very moment. You know the stars go crazy in the importune moment. It's all the same. It's unnatural. You can sing if you want to, though I sense you're kind of clutched. It's a natural day, it's a natural time. You're gonna get all hyphy in a minute. There will be lots of bogling there. If you know that reference, you will be impatient. It's unnatural time, it's about to go. Bye-bye, Lucy, hello, Thaddeus. Bye-bye, Lucy, hello, Thaddeus. Bye-bye. Well, thank you.
Hello, I'm Erica. Thank you so much. University of Pittsburgh community, students, grad students, and staff, the Center for African American Poetry and Poetics, Don Lundy Martin, Lauren Russell. Thank you to my collaborators, co-conspirators, and friends for our living single moment. And thank you also so much to Thaddeus Mosley for your generosity and wisdom, for your patience and openness, for waiting for 25 minutes in the car for us to get our sandwiches from Pepe's. Thank you. I'm going to read sort of a meditation in 5 parts, sort of 6 parts. We sit in a sacred space at the intersection of the Allegheny, Monongahela, that give birth to the Ohio, the Good River, an immense watershed that extends from southwestern New York to eastern Illinois, a water system that encompasses 189,422 square miles. After nearly 1,000 miles, the Ohio flows into the Mississippi, the mother of rivers, and south to the Gulf of Mexico. And at the Gulf, encounters the Gulf Loop, a current that flows northwards from the Caribbean Sea up into the Gulf. The loop sheds a rotating ring of warm water that, as the season approaches, provides additional energy to encroaching hurricanes, largely created off the coast of West Africa. We breathe here together in the dark and the light at the confluence of Pennsylvania and Guinea, of wood and water, of time. At Thad's house, everything is beautiful. The bathroom lampshade, the photograph of his mother as a baby, every plate and mug. Thad shows us binders full of original publications from the art expos he and his friends organized for Black artists in the 50s and 60s in Pittsburgh. Fran uncovers a poem by an 18-year-old August Wilson, and we all gasp. Carrick Healing, professor of cinema arts at University of Southern California, speaks of the labor required of Black people to create and maintain alternative organizations of social life. At 91 years of age, Thad has done the labor of nearly 5 generations. Fran caresses the page. "Read it," says Doug or Ronaldo, and she does. And the Bamileke beaded statue casts a 100-year-long shadow, and my photo is too dim. Another expo, poet Gaston Neal. His daughter was my kindergarten student, Thad. I just went to her wedding, I exclaim, and send her the picture on Facebook. "This is amazing," we moan. "Oh, there's more," says Thad, and bites some apple. Winter is coming. Along the 3 rivers, a migration route. The crows are back by the thousands. They call to each other in their language, the space between notes determining meaning, a jazz of calls to say predator or hide or call the particular name of a familiar. Campus media and neighborhood bloggers will bemoan the mess. Maintenance workers will play owl songs to urge them away. Nonetheless, at sunset, the sky above the avenue will be black with their refusal. That studio sits underground, just above the alluvial aquifer, Pittsburgh's nominal 4th river. And in the studio, his newest work, spherical sculptures on bases carved in and against the grain, scalloped surfaces of umber and black, shadow and light, curved into and out like the fist of a heart, where so much is extended and suspended in flight, reaching, precipitous. I place my hand along the curve. So much valve and medicine. The life that was green here, aperture of time, the hands that lifted and scoured the bark, that scored the face of this plane. Imagine the great black chest in which it sits, how it armed the spiral, how its cousin emerged from the log and faced its creator and breathed. The word according to Thad. Levitation. If I have a talent, that's my main talent. Making things that can come apart, put back together. Stability, defy gravity. Do you know it's gonna work? No! I think everyone should make whatever they want. This is the cure-all. I am a music person. Now, when you see a word or phrase that relates to a phrase in the fourth stanza, if you study literature, that is what it will do. I have a stack of poetry by my bed. Thank you.
No, I got it. I figured. Options. I thought I had it. Microphone check. I'm a professional. Let me see. I just need to get this going. Thank you. Thank you all very much for coming here to honor Mr. Mosley. Thank you for bringing us here, Dawn, Lauren, CAAPP, Pitt, and thank you, as everyone has said, but again, thank you for all that generosity, just all that you shared with us. Just thank you, Thaddeus. So, Dawn did me the great service of braiding some of my words with Fred Moten's. A great thinker, poet. And when confronted with Mr. Mosley's work, I began thinking about how it could change my work. What interfacing with his craft could do to mine. And one thing that sculpture and poetry have in common is form. This is a quote from the documentary. Attempt to make 6 elements uneven. Tallest piece on that side. A lower piece that moves. The other piece is moving too much. The other piece is lower but rounder. All of these sort of fit together. Of course, they have to come apart to move. And that is the trick. Here's a work song. Hammer, hammer, hammering is hammering, hammering, hammering is hammering, hammering, hammer, hammer, hammering, hammering, hammering is hammering his hand, hammering is hammer, hammer, hammering is in his hand, hammering in his hand, hammer in his hand, hammer in his hammer. Hammer, bring me water in his hand. Hammer, hammer isn't, bring me water, hammer. Hammer in his, lay the way down, hammer, hammer, hammer in his, lay the weight down, way to lay it down, hammer, hammer, hammer in his, hammer in his, what the wood say is, bring me water. What the wood say is, bring me water, hammer in his, what the wood say is, hammer in his, what he would say is, hammer in his hand, hammer in a hammer in his hand, his hand, lay the weight down, hammer in the way to lay it down, what would say is, bring me water in his hand, hammer, way down is hammer in his hand, way down. What the wood say is, don't lay down, hammer. The wood say, don't lay down, the hammer in his hand. Water, lay on his brow, don't lay down, hammer, down, lay it down, would you lay it down, don't? So I wanted to make I kept imagining this as like a sextet, right? And I wanted to make a sextet that would play for this piece. This here, not that one, this one. One of the other things that Mr. Mosley said, referencing that same sculpture, is, and of course, all black walnut isn't the same color. And I just kept thinking about that. And I thought about it long enough to do this. This poem takes each word that Mr. Mosley says, and of course, all black walnut isn't the same color, and defines each one. And cascades down in the shape and the curve of the wood. Because how can you make a two-dimensional object look three-dimensional? How can you turn wood into water and yet have the wood still live? I'll play a second of this. Interest in jazz. Here as jazz come. There literally is an assemblage, and Mosley's studio, one might notice the sudden shift in the air. Tons of logs, moist-inging, the sweeter sawdust smells, the outer weather pressing in. It feels subterranean stone cavern, rather the underside in woods in a city's parkland. I found myself most struck by, lit for me when Mosley described, attempt to make 6 elements, tallest piece of that side. From this passage in 6 discrete sections, each that travel more or less the content of each section piece, a lower mowing. Constrained by form to this end, I've included a response to Mosley's Mosley's hammering and couches, structure and poetry both contain forms. Mosley, container of ideas and impulses. Mosley, container of ideas and impulses. Tallest, though not intend as linguistic, be open to me. Sudden a draft beyond me to independence, their own only as it works textual. So I found myself most struck by the relationship between modularity and individual parts of his sestet are complete on the either of the whole, or whether they are limbs complete. Use work, it's a visual representation. Audio proper, studio proper. I was surprised by its arrangement in the vestibule, the sculptural, creating an impression of gateways or a group of heralds. Small wonder then that fanfare for Fannie Lou Hamer. Looking at the sculptures, I began to feel like the side at my right resembled a cityscape. Found metal pieces decked some of the wood forms, and less rhizomatic structures crowned them. The left side had density, with more syncopation in the structure's heights. With more syncopation in the structure's heights. This is a type study about the cut. The plus minus symbol is perfect to describe what Thaddeus Mosley does with his cuts. Because he takes away, but the taking away is an addition. That type study led me to this sonnet. What give a space a weight? What a cut is, a taking that give. He cut weight-shaped shape up into space. Mallet, rocket, chisel, shuttle up in the wood to cut weight-shaped shape. It don't mean a thing, he say. The shape would be don't mean a thing. Hammer in hand, he tap into wood. Space he shape in a woods of woods his shape in. Shapes he shape in him, the wood, all that in, all that space. He tap into wood to know what don't mean a thing, mean things. Wood to woods. Space and ain't got that, but what it ain't got, weight down in it. Mallet, mattock, chisel, shovel. He cut space out weight to take shape. Thank you.
Please, one more round of applause for all of our poets and Thaddeus Mosley, Francine J. Harris, Ronaldo V. Wilson, R. Erica Doyle, and Douglas Kearney. We definitely invited the right four, I think, to engage your work. It was an amazing diversity of engagement. So I mean, my first question actually is, the thing that we know is that these four wonderful poets / artists, performers went to Thaddeus's studio and spent some time with him. And then we have what they made. And so my question to you is actually a process question, because you all came up with radically different articulations, utterances around and engaging the work and the experience. And so I'm curious as to how you came to what you came to, and what was surprising to you about it. How we know we talk a lot about how works of art change us, and so I'm curious also about how you were changed, how your work was changed. Any of those questions you can touch on or engage, please.
Yeah, I mean, one piece that I was working on a lot this week, but it was too long in the end, is really sort of referencing something that Thaddeus did directly. There's a poem by Dylan Thomas called Ballad of the Long-Legged Bait. And, you know, Thaddeus is always emphasizing that the forms that he makes, and if I get anything wrong, I'm sure I'll be checked. But like, that was a pun. Anyway, that the forms that he makes are not imitative, right? But they are to try to get to an idea of the thing. And so one of the things that I ended up doing was I took the same poem, and I just took all of the end words and made a new poem out of that. But the hardest thing for me was trying to get to that space that the sculptural form can do, which is to point at space, the absence of space, but also creating a presence in that same space. I kept trying to figure out how to pull farther away from representation through this process, and I kept working at it, trying to whittle it further and further away to be able to just manifest without it being a strictly visual dynamic through language, whole and the space around the whole. How to fill that without filling it with sound in a particular sort of way. So that's something that I'm still like thinking through. A couple of the other things that I wrote are trying to get to that. So it's something that I'm chasing, and that's really been interesting for me.
Let's see, so process, I think I had actually tried to start a few drafts before, I only had 2 drafts before I got here, and I knew I wouldn't use them at all, but I just wanted to kind of have a record of the process, my thought process. And then I think some of the process has just been trying to put something down every day, every moment that I had, because there's been so many things this week. So just like every time I come back, just put something else down. And I think the moment that you know you have something is when it finds its form. So, you know, when I had the sonnet, when I had like, oh, the 12 moods, like, yes, that works because it's a form. Researching just things I didn't know, things he would mention that I just hadn't, like it took me a while to figure out that you were saying chihuahua. I didn't know that phrase, and so I was like, okay, so I'll just research that, and researching Brancusi, like your influences, backgrounds, where Brancusi grew up, and then finding out that he was like a young boy that was like carving farm tools. I was like, oh yeah, that's good. So some of the research helped. And I think in terms of what was different for me, it's just wanting this to be like a little more straightforward, a little more communal than how I normally write. So it just allows me to kind of declare things and say things plainly, I suppose, a little more plainly, which was really, it's really enjoyable.
Thank you. I was carrying around a small, I guess, boutonniere, I call it, a little fragments of shavings that were carried around, which you saw in the video. I feel in some ways maybe the process to me has to do more with being led to the moment in which I encountered an artist who I admire, not only because of the kind of stature, what it means to make art for so many years and in such a kind of insistent way, but also the kind of limitations, particularly around, you know, one question was, I was so interested in how if the studio it's 10 feet high, they would be larger. And I started thinking about goldfish, you know, or animals that only grow within certain spaces. And I felt a great ease in Thaddeus's studio. I felt disarmed. I also felt a way in which I could be open. Just a slight backstory is that I had just come from MacDowell Artist Residency as an interdisciplinary artist, in which I was surrounded by all of these trees. So I felt, oh, here are these trees, and then they're becoming, you know, and then my encounter with trees in this way I think was very important for me in terms of working through the question of, you know, I think about Baldwin's relationship between the skull, the heart, the mind, the self, all of the layers and ontologies of representation that get worked out through the sculptural, through the poetic, and ways in which I was hoping to just find my way through it. And I don't know what it all means, or if it's, you know, the word derivative of what's being unearthed. I'm thinking about just little things in the body now, like the ulna and the radius. What's going on here? You know, for me, those questions are, I think, heightened by being in relationship with the relationships that I think are being formed. And as an artist, I can't ask for anything more unusual, the kind of the relationships that are happening between the forms for me today and probably forever.
I think for me, this was a tremendous honor to be with, really, to spend so much time and to be shared with so generously by someone who really is a luminous being. That is a treasure. He's international, global, human, UN heritage person. This is really what we're talking about. And it was so moving for me to see someone who not only was an artist, and I think we talked about this too, but someone who was sharing the trajectory of their life as an artist, as a thinker, as someone who's part of a family, as someone who's part of a community, as someone who built and created things when there was nothing, as someone who was working in Black arts with Black people at very dangerous times, other dangerous times, and creating things and constructing things and making space in the world. And I really tried to stay very fresh to the homework. So our homework was to create stuff here. And it really, and I had an idea of what might happen, and it really for me became about that, the being, the person, this human being, and in the context of where he is, and looking at where are we right now? Where are we breathing together? What else breathes here? Especially because I think the fact that Thad works in wood, and as he told us, is one of the few people locally who are still working in wood. And actually that's a thing that, you know, sort of in the art world, it's true. There are less and less people who are working in wood, who are working with this once living material that, especially in many traditions, is also a spiritually charged material. And the connections here that we're sitting on these enormous bodies of water that are coming together, and there's a power and a spirituality in that. And he kept mentioning that, and I thought, oh, that's interesting, because as we know from Wangari Maathai, that without trees there's no water, and without water there are no trees. And so this, I just kind of became really interested in the symbioology, and then also how Thad had connected all these artists, had connected with all these artists, supported these artists, and continued to be connected to artists throughout time. And as, you know, sort of this, you know, as we were sort of these tributaries sort of flowing into him. And so I was really thinking about the time and the space, and where, like, what exactly is happening in this time and in this space, and of course, our experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I put you in a kind of a pressure cooker.
Yes.
So was it, I mean, was that like a productive experience, or was it like dissociative, or was it liberating, or because there was a way in which, yeah, you're like, you know, it was really lovely, but also, right, you had to make something in like 4 days,
Yeah.
or think through something in 4 days. So,
Or not, right? I mean, I think there's also the relationship with not working in language, of resisting the explanation, of resisting, you know, I don't know if my impulse was to even try to write a poem as an address. For me, it was just to say, wow, those shapes are so unusual. What can my body do in relationship to that? And is there a language that can be transferred in terms of my walk for the day? Will this branch keep me safe for the day as I walk and, you know, bust out with all these materials in front of a fireplace at a Research One university with a bag that could carry a rifle, but it was a tripod, right? I mean, but does this work allow different maneuverings into the world? Are these shapes new possible formations that are not? You know, and are those ways to get in or under the 10 feet space of survival, which creates a kind of well, I was thinking of the locus root, but I'm also thinking about the locust and locus. What is the locus that is not, I think, for me, embedded within language? And that's just where I think I'm interested in terms of looking at this work, because it's overwhelming to witness it and decide at one moment, you know, I don't have to speak. I don't have to talk to anyone.
I think it's just, I mean, in terms of this process, in some ways, I don't know if I'm gonna disagree with myself as soon as I say this, but often happens. But I feel like I don't have enough opportunity to have something have this much stake, and so like it means something. The whole process that I've been going through, it's a gift to be given, but also like you're trying to make a tribute means something, right? It means something. It mattered to me that I was doing this for you and for this whole event. So the pressure was kind of terrible and kind of awesome at the same time.
Well, I was just going to say very quickly, I think for me, I said, oh, Dawn, she's making us work like we're a kavikanam, where you have to write a poem a night. I said, oh, she knows we can do it, so that's why she set us up. But I think also for me, I generally, you know, I made a little video, which I don't generally do, but I think I was just, you know, on the walks, I was just looking, so what is it about this place? What is it about this place that is part of sort of the atmosphere? And that's when I looked up and saw those crows, for example. You know, so just being able to be being extremely, extremely present, very present with Thad, like really listening and just sort of basking in the glow and the beautiful stuff in his house. Like when you talked about how you feel happy and comforted, and there are these beautiful things in your house, it's true. It is a magical palace. And to be fully present for those experiences of being here, I think that's really what it did. And I definitely did things I wouldn't do. I didn't really write poems. I did, but I kind of hated them. But instead, I was like, you know what? I just really have these sort of meditations, and that's what I want to do. And I filmed these, you know, beautiful crows. These like black things people keep complaining about and not valuing, and I'm going to show that too.
Yeah, I mean, like Ronaldo, I mean, I was thinking about movement the moment I went into the studio. I mean, in that space, you know, what you were talking about in terms of touch, Francine, it's like, you're not supposed to just like stare at them. Like they're set up, it's like a forest.
Yeah, it's
like,
a forest.
Like one side is like a forest and one
Yeah.
side is like a city.
Right.
Right? And I just kept, I mean, one of the things that I started sketching towards was like imagining if there was some kind of performance, it would have to be an opera in that space. If there were some kind of opera, it couldn't just be people going, there is the it would have to be, the music would have to be as asymmetrical and as precariously balanced. The story would have to then be as asymmetrical and precariously balanced and still beautiful and flowing and fluid. There were figures in there that looked like characters that would sit, you going through, this is landscape, but this character is a sage, or this character is this three-horned, you know, antelope creature. There's a box with three faces that would speak to you in like the kind of classical sense of like a three-faced god or three-faced figure. And that would probably have taken me about a week and a half more to write that whole opera. So I'm sorry that I didn't have time. But I mean, that's the kind of thing that happens in that space for me. That there was, yeah, I mean, there were so many paths you could follow. And even if you didn't get to like, Yahtzee, no, you'd find something along the way, and it would transform you. And so that's, for me, you know, I generated a lot of stuff. And some of it is really interesting. I mean, like, you know, I kept this kind of packet that I kept adding to and like sharing. But yeah, I mean, it was pressure, but it was a good kind of pressure, because the nature of that work that we were looking at is like, it don't mean a thing, right? Which is open, but then there's the caveat, right? If it ain't got that swing, right? It has to, you have to, if you're not feeling your way through it, it doesn't matter how good it looks. And so
Have
that
to
was,
levitate.
yeah, exactly.
I love what you did, Doug, when you kind of ripped up the page and then read from those ripped up pages that resembled the architecture that you had created, that was engaging the architecture created in the sculpture by that. I mean, I thought it was amazing, but also I was like, how is he ripping them? It seemed kind of happenstance in terms of the rip, but kind of, you know, approximating at the same time. So how much of that was improvisation?
This evening after dinner, I decided to rip, but I had no idea what I was gonna have. So when I did it, so I just dealt with what was ever was there. I mean, you know, Thaddeus has to deal with whatever wood comes in, right? So for me, I was like, I just have to deal with these pieces of trees, right? I have to deal with this wood, and I have to try to make something from that wood. So yeah.
I think, so we have some time for questions from the audience. If you have a question, please raise your hand and someone will give you a microphone.
Troy
Please speak
Derricott,
into
do you
the
have
microphone.
a question?
I guess this is a question, but I just was shocked how it was like parts of an opera, or parts everyone seemed to have an essential part that fitted with everybody else's part. It's almost like I want to see it again just the same way, you know. So a lot of times, you know, you think of artists working alone, and yet this is very important that you were all together. So did that change the way you were thinking about your work and the energy you brought to it? And did you have any idea what everybody else was going to do? And did that affect what you were doing, or was this just magic? I mean,
Yes. We definitely had conversations, and we saw some of like little glimpses of what folks were doing, and we kind of were sharing our ideas a little bit. And I knew that he had, you know, gone wandering about as Lucy in the Cathedral of Learning, and I think I talked to Ronaldo. I was like, I have this video, I'm going to show it. What do you think? So there was a little bit of that, but I think also for myself, I was like, I just got to get this done. Oh my God! So there wasn't a lot of time like, hey, here's my finished product for myself. But definitely the conversations that we had, and I think, for me, particularly the conversation about legacy and about supporting other artists and longevity and what you do throughout your career and your life, that was really positive for me to have with everybody.
It's an interesting question in terms of emergence, and I think nascency, what it meant for all of us to arrive in Pittsburgh and to emerge as wake-up people, groggy, kind of who's doing what, who's in their coffee, who's eaten, who's not, who ate the muffin last night, did you eat the chocolate, and all of us entering a studio space. And I wanted to talk about that in particular around what it meant to be disciplined by a studio and multiple pieces of art arranged and made, and that energy. So it was like a kind of quad moving into this other space, and that kind of ricochet, and also eating together. And I'm just thinking about what happens collaboratively, like sleeping next to one another, and these doors, and what that does, and did our dreams intersect, and and so there's, I think what I was most moved by was the kind of unspoken awe of being trained by this work, and being trained in the sense of almost kind of pulled into a conversation under the surface of what is collaborative. So in some ways it's fascinating to me to be submerged in that thing. So maybe it's not silence, but perhaps it's something else. I think the word that comes to mind is there's a kind of shared digestion, you know, something that about like, yum, yum. And then, whoa, there's something in there that you're making me think of now. Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think yes to all of that, but also I've spent a lot of time this week just thinking about your curation of like just bringing us here, because I think I was gonna say thing, but I don't want to put words on how I feel like we all approach this, but I do feel like we sort of came at it from 4 directions of the earth. So yeah, there was that. I think it was a good mix.
First of all, I was very excited. I'm a journalist and was very excited to hear that Thaddeus Mosley was a journalist, so studied journalism also. But my question is, I work with young people who are, you know, in a very competitive program, and they're all like super, super serious about being artists and writers. I mean, they already are. And recently, I mean, we've been talking about, you know, storytelling or making pieces of, you know, making stories, whether they're visual or like written stories, and the idea that, you know, at the beginning, like the students are getting ready to investigate something, and they, you know, have a tendency to sort of like be at the beginning and imagine what they think it's going to be at the end. And then, you know, we just talk about the idea that it's like if you start a piece of work and it's exactly what you think it's going to be when you finish, you probably haven't investigated it very deeply, or you haven't experimented, or, you know, because how can you think of it, go through a process, and it's exactly that. So I'm just curious, you know, with some of you or any or all of you, I mean, you were working, you know, as you were saying, being trained with a form that I imagine you don't usually work on, and at the, you know, you've come here and now you presented this thing, you're kind of on deadline, but it was like, you know, I'm curious, like in the beginning when you know, realized you were going to go into a studio and sort of engage with this sculpture stuff, what did any of you think in the beginning like it was going to be? What did you think it was you were going to do as opposed to what you ended up with here? Just curious.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I was thinking, and it kind of connects to the question Toy asked, I kept thinking that I was going to have to make something that could interlock together, something that would be modular. So I had these like floating lines that would move from one poem to the next so that I could imagine it kind of like being combined, right? And I was really excited about the Dylan Thomas poem because I hadn't planned to do anything with that, but the last word of that poem is hand, which is the end of the hammer in his hand, you know, floating line. So I was like, oh, I definitely got to do this. But I kept thinking I was going to have to, by myself, make that work. And what Toy pointed out to me was like, no, that was never it. This is the interlocking thing that holds together, right? And so it was kind of like, duh. I'm fortunate enough, I teach at an art school, so I do lots of studio visits. So on the one hand, I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to do a studio visit. It's going to be, you know, but this time I'm going to do something, right? But I cannot tell you, you go down this staircase, which is like entering like the deep space, and you're immediately hit by this smell of all of this wood and wet dirt and moss and growing things and spider webs. And then you walk into this space and it just, like all the shapes that I had in mind in my head, and I watched the documentary. And it's one thing to look at something like this, framed in a screen. It's another thing to look at something like this, then this, then this, then this, then this, then this, then this, in a three-dimensional area layered coming out at you. Arranged without looking arranged. Your eye going up and down, up and down. So for me, encountering that like in the real world just made me think about how can I make language do more than I usually make it do? How can I do this? How can I make anybody who's not in this space feel anything like what it's like to be in this space? And of course it's an impossibility, but the reach for it, I might find something else really good. I might have a generative failure. So for me, the kinds of things that I think of and just sort of tell myself all the time, oh, it's okay to like reach and fail. Like, it was like, do you really believe that? Here is your opportunity to make something that is not going to be a kind of a calculated risk, but to try to make something that actually pushes you and to try to push against the things that your habits are. I haven't written a sonnet in forever. And there were a couple of other forms that I had written poems for that I just tossed because they did, not because they didn't work, but because they led me to the sonnet, right? I learned something through that process. So that, to me, the idea that we had enough time to make stuff that we didn't use, that was a surprise, right?
Yeah, I think that was partly what I was going to say too, is that I sort of feel like your question is a little unanswerable because I still have things in mind that I think I'll do. There was, and I don't know if talking about it too much will mean I don't do it. But I think maybe I thought things would look a little cleaner somehow. I don't know. Like I had these notions of these sort of stacked forms. I was going to do this stacked sonnet because I was thinking a lot about the way that you intersect grains. Like you'll have a sycamore that's like underneath the locust, and just thinking about stacked forms. But that didn't happen at all. So I think I thought it would be a little cleaner and maybe a little more visual. I guess is the moment to say that I don't know how it has happened that I'm among these incredible visual people, and I felt comfortable enough in my words, and so I guess I want to thank you all for that. I don't know how that happened, but I think it's just your generosity and warmth. But yeah, so I think there's still more to come out of this. I feel really full.
Other questions? I think 2 or 3 more, and then we'll end.
Hello, everybody. Hello. This is just more like a comment more than anything else. I think the verbal and the physical and the digital display was great, but it would have been even greater if we had one of Mr. Mosley's pieces in his stage to connect, to make that connections.
All right.
You mentioned you didn't understand or you couldn't answer one of the audience question, but if there were a piece there, it would have been a lot more easier.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question there.
Hi. I think for artists or poets in particular, kind of creating work for a very specific occasion is a less common opportunity. And we've all had the gift of experiencing the work you've created tonight here within these walls. And I just wonder how for each of you as artists, you think the work you made here tonight might or will exist for you beyond tonight.
Well, I think for me, a little bit, as I was saying earlier, I feel like this experience was personally and internally transformative. And for me, that's what I'm carrying with me. How will it live? I mean, hopefully I will type this and send it to that so he could actually read it. It's like really crazy in my journal right now. So I'm thinking that, so editing, revising what I've done, but really just the experience of really being seriously very healing, being with such a generous presence, and someone who is okay. It's really important to, I think, as an artist, in particular, I think as a black artist in the U.S., what could your life be like? How could you be? And I think for me that was personally transformative, and I'm going to keep that with me forever.
I definitely think that I feel like I at least have drafts that I will revise and send out. I mean, Thaddeus is a big deal. I think people will want to see the work.
I think in some ways I wanted to address both of the questions. The question around the student's tendency to want to create something that's already finished, and also what it means in terms of what to do with this work. I don't know. I mean, I think essentially there's something in and around the opportunity to face big philosophical questions, like what does time look like? Yeah. You know, how do I have to rethink time outside of space? What is my time? You know, it's not like when, at least for me personally speaking, it's not like anything stopped, right? It's not like my mother was less ill. It's not like, you know, my art, my project stopped. What I'm working on as a poet stopped. It's just a matter of, I'm in this time at this moment, and I'm asked to synthesize in this way and be as generous as I can be in the space of whatever the disruption is, whatever the healing is. And I think part of it is what I think I'm thinking about is, and I was talking with Toy a little bit about this, is how do it's helping me think about what are my habituations, right? If I'm trying to write this ending, is that because that ending is particularly so heinous that I actually have to redress that ending? Is it in fact more important for me to face the ending of my life or the mortality? And this is what I think this work forces me to think through, is when you give over to the source work of art for this long, to be 91, that's incredible in terms of how do you bear witness to the question of time as an artist within that personal and spiritual and physical space, which has nothing to do with the production, right? I mean, I'm working on an installation project, I have books, clearly this will all be, you know, clearly it's going to be available, but I think the unavailability of what it means for once in my life to think about, oh, this is the way. A few things that Thaddeus said that were really interesting was they lived a fast life when talking about some of his, you know, friends. And also when I asked about the arrangement of these pictures, there's nothing to it. And I wonder about what that long meditation might look like and how to get in line and witness and just absorb it, which I think is different than the product or the function of the ending or the purposefulness of the art object. You know, I'm thinking about the objective of one's relationship to time and space as a body and what that means as an artist. So I think for me, I'm really interested in when I can confront these large questions of being, and you know, we learn them in a way that I think is interesting here. I did.
You know, Ronaldo just did with, I have a mentor, I had a mentor when I was in graduate school, and in a space like this, you know, there would be a Q&A, and she would say, you know, she would say, someone would ask a question, and she would say, I'll take 5 more questions, and then I'll answer across them, which I love. Thank you. So if there is one more question, we have time for one more question before we leave. Nobody wants to ask the first or the last question. I shouldn't have said it was the last question.
I just wonder if you could speak to the analogy between revision in terms of writing and whittling a piece of wood. In other words, addition by subtraction. And if you think there is any analogy there or not. And I want to thank everybody for your different forms of creativity. The one with body movement, and we saw visually making a poem showing like the grain of the wood. It was very, very creative. So I like the different forms your work took in terms of creativity, but I wonder if you could address the idea of like revision being addition through subtraction and whittling language.
You're asking us to upset Mr. Mosley.
Yeah. Well, the one thing I think about is how one of the things Thad said that I quoted in the Word according to Thad, which is, do you know if it's going to work or not? No.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We were like, okay.
Thank you so much for coming. It's been an honor to honor Thaddeus Mosley. Thank you.